Here in Canada's Saskatchewan province,
yeah, it's a great day for making potash.
We're travelling a kilometre underground. It takes 4 minutes in the cage to reach the mine floor.
So your ears might start to pop a little bit?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing as a dive tank.
Follow us. Watch your step.
And another half hour travelling in these electric vehicles to reach the face of this potash mine.
What potash is, it's KCl.
Potash is a rich source of potassium. It can be used in detergents and pharmaceuticals, but by far its most common use is in fertilisers. In recent years, almost a third of the globe's potash has come from Canada, from mines just like this one. Chad Litzenberger is the mine's superintendent.
This mining machine is a $30 million mining machine and setup that chews the face, cuts the ore, puts it into a conveyor system in the front, and ultimately starts to convey it into the conveyor belt system to get to the shaft.
It's one of 10 boring machines operating at this site alone.
Yeah, you can feel the heat coming off the metal, and this machine is putting some significant horsepower into the face. I believe it's 700 horsepower on each arm, just chewing away at creating crushed ore.
Chewing away up to 900 tonnes of ore an hour. The ore is about 40% potash, 5% clay and 55% sodium chloride, or salt.
The ground underneath is incredibly soft, a little bit like walking on sand at the beach. We've got to watch out for some of these cables. It's really warm too, it's 27 degrees year round. But what really blows my mind is the fact that this mineral coming out here will be exported to almost every continent around the globe.
And that's helping farmers to feed millions of people. For Chad, a trip to India some years ago highlighted the impact of using fertilisers such as potash.
I can remember one conversation where one of the farmers said they are growing their crops and having a nine-time yield increase. And as he was talking about this, I asked him, well, what do you do with all the extra material? And he said he had so much that he actually bought a grain bin. And I'm a Saskatchewan farm background kid, so I'm looking around for a 20,000 bushel bin, and I couldn't see it anywhere. And I finally asked him, where's your grain bin? And he said, well, you're leaning on it. And there's this barrel, a 200-liter barrel. And it was starting to hit me that,
That's
the amount...
more like a garbage bin.
Exactly. And so then I asked him what he does with all the extra, assuming that he would sell it on the market or buy something, and he said, well, we eat more. And this is when it hit me of the purpose that we do here, the agriculture sector that we're in. And so sometimes I feel like we get a little disconnected from the day-to-day activities and what we're doing in a mining operation, but the purpose that we have is to truly support feeding the world.
About half the food produced on the planet is grown using commercial fertilisers, primarily made up of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, or NP and K. But it comes at a cost to the environment.
There's greenhouse gas emissions, both pre-farm, on-farm, and also through post-farm activities, including through waste distribution. We have environmental impacts, which include eutrophication of waterways. That's increased nitrogen in the waterways, which can increase algal blooms, and sometimes acidification of soils associated with fertiliser application.
Mark Howden is Director of the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions at the Australian National University. He says the application of nitrogen fertilisers contributes a little under 3% of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions.
In Australia, roughly speaking, in agriculture, about 14 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents a year. So that's a few percent of our total emissions. So it's significant, but it's not a massive contributor like, say, our electricity system. With other fertilisers, such as phosphate fertilisers, you don't get those same greenhouse gases on farm, but they still have an energy footprint, so during their mining and processing and distribution of those. So different fertilisers have different footprints effectively.
Those footprints are leading some governments to impose restrictions. In 2021, Sri Lanka banned all commercial fertilisers. New Zealand's recently capped nitrogen use on its farms. And in the Netherlands, the government is buying back farms over concerns about nitrogen runoff.
So in Sri Lanka, that was largely a function of foreign currency limitations and the ability to buy in those fertilisers, which then got very politicised. And that was a big problem because it drove down food production in Sri Lanka. If you look at, say, the Netherlands or New Zealand, the big drive there is particularly groundwater pollution and river pollution. So it's nitrogen in the groundwater and in the river systems.
In Canada, a country with similar production systems to Australia, the policy is different again. 3 years ago, the Trudeau government set a target to reduce the emissions from fertiliser application by 30% by 2030.
To be honest, it kind of caught everyone in the industry off guard. I wouldn't say anyone anticipated this kind of announcement, and to date, it appears to be met with somewhat of a mixture of confusion, frustration, and for some people, hostility.
Alberta-based journalist Trevor Back is following the policy.
Now, what's interesting about this is these are voluntary targets, and farmers obviously need fertilizer to have a successful crop. And so with the word voluntary in the language there, no one's really sure why they would reduce the fertilizer if they need it. So that's what's caused some confusion among the ag industry. We have all types of agriculture in Canada, but the grain sector is massive, billions, tens of billions of dollars. And so the idea that farmers would not necessarily be able to use their desired quantity of fertilizer, their primary input, is a frightening prospect for many.
For now, Trevor says the policy has stalled.
Industry came out after the government said 30%, and they published a paper and they said the best we can do is 16%. And after that, there's been a bit of a standstill. Nothing really has been happening.
The Australian government's working on a plan to reduce agricultural emissions as part of its net zero by 2050 commitment. It's unclear what could be in that. For now, the government hasn't really said anything about changes to fertiliser application on farms, but there's some concern that that could change.
The risk I see for Australia is that the government may copy what's been done in other countries. That isn't necessarily the blueprint for Australia.
Stephen Annals is from the industry body Fertiliser Australia.
If they were to copy what other countries are doing, what other jurisdictions are doing, the solution might have some undesired effects and may not have the effect that they actually want.
Could you elaborate on those undesired effects?
Lower yields, less food production, and potentially lower exports for Australia.
So has fertiliser become a dirty word?
In some circles, yes. There are some movements that see there's no need for fertiliser, but those are very, very small enterprises, and largely in enterprises where fertiliser hasn't been a great player, such as some of the grazing industries, broadacre grazing industries, where some of these practices have been practiced for many, many years. But with broadacre cropping and with horticulture and with most other things where you're deliberately growing plants, you need fertiliser.
Good boy. Good boy. We do post-emergence, which is your super, the old super, and we put urea out just after seeding.
For Sally Zacher, applying fertiliser to crops on her South Australian farm is a no-brainer.
So if we didn't have access to fertiliser, we just wouldn't make money, really. It comes down to it. We need the fertiliser to capitalise on our cropping potential.
The Ukraine war, sanctions imposed on Belarus, China's domestic reservation policy and huge gas prices contributed to Australian fertiliser prices soaring more than 180% between January 2020 and last September.
Last year, the fertiliser was so expensive.
While prices have eased since, Sally says she never considered not applying the fert.
We didn't see it as an option of not buying it. We just took the brunt and paid for it, urea and super, and we wouldn't have had the crops we ended up with, which were the best on record. So I just don't know where we'd be if we couldn't get a hold of fertiliser. We'd find it somehow and pay for it, no matter what it had cost us.
Australian farmers applied a record 7 million tonnes of N, P and K combined in 2021. According to industry, that's about 1% of the world's fertiliser use.
We do have to put fertiliser into our farming systems to have effective production of those farming systems. Otherwise, we'd run down production very significantly and very quickly. And at the moment, we can't put on that fertiliser without some greenhouse gas footprint, either pre-farm or on-farm. And so it essentially comes with the territory of food production. So what we need to do is put in place efficiency measures so we can actually use less fertiliser to get the same amount of food production. And we also need to look at research and development.
Fertiliser remains big business. The global industry is expected to be worth around $166 billion by 2027. An Indonesian company is now seeking approval for a $1.5 billion takeover of Australia's largest fertiliser manufacturer and distributor, Incitec Pivot, while Nutrien, listed on the New York and Toronto stock exchanges, supplies about 15 million tonnes of potash and another 12 million tonnes of nitrogen and phosphate combined, making it one of, if not the, biggest fertiliser company in the world.
This should be coming up any moment.
90 seconds from the bottom of the mine up here.
Back at its mine outside Saskatoon, potash is being processed almost as quickly as it reaches the surface.
Very tall bin. I think that's just a little shy of 50 tons.
So every 90 seconds, a new bin, 24 hours a day, almost every day of the year.
Yeah.
The company claims to have many decades of potash reserves. Australian farmers will apply about 300,000 tonnes this year.
It can make 2 million tons a year, and with capacity to continue to increase.
Yeah.
And the global market is only 70 million.
Tim Barnstable is in charge of the mine's surface operations.
Our site, like our milling process, has about 1,100 rotating pieces of equipment and 8,000 instruments so that we can automate it.
The ore is put through a series of centrifuges and dryers.
Potash processing is actually very efficient. In one step, we're getting about 85% of the material recovered, as well as it's already at product quality.
So you could put that on a farm?
Yeah, you could put it on a farm right now.
Once it's through the mill, the potash can be loaded onto trains for export via the port of Vancouver.
You can get a rail car loaded in about 6 minutes, and so it's basically just open the hatches, move it into place, dump, 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 close the hatches, move it along, next rail car. So it's pretty quick. It allows us lots of flexibility on loading the different product. We have about 70 to 80,000 tons of product in inventory, and the latest price is around $307, so it adds up pretty quick.
The numbers are staggering, but for growers like Sally, the ability to use fertiliser is about more than dollars and cents.
Farmers have been improving their farming practices forever. If we can't get fertiliser, then our crop yields go down, our viability goes down, and we can't grow the world crop. We need fertiliser to grow a world crop to feed everybody. Simple.